We are going to talk a little bit about networking today and kind of how to fit into a professional puzzle. So what we're really going to talk about today is exactly what networking is, I think most of us know, and why you want to get good at doing it, how you go about doing it, and we're going to do just one kind of, there's all sorts of places that you'll be networking, from sitting on a plane to going to a conference, but we're going to talk specifically about how to navigate career fairs, because I think a lot of times when you go into a room like that, it is so overwhelmingly large that you need to figure out a good strategy for how to go about navigating that situation. So we're going to talk specifically about that, and then we are actually I'm going to have you practice with each other, just evaluating a couple of things, one being your handshake and two being your eye contact. So you're just going to go around the room and meet different people, and then they're going to actually evaluate your handshake, just because it's not something you ever do with your friends or your dissertation director or anybody. You usually don't go up and go, how's my handshake? You know, and so you really kind of want to maybe get some frank advice from your colleagues and your friends about how to go about doing that, so that you do have that kind of non-verbal communication that is right on. So what I want to do is kind of talk about what exactly networking is. And the reason I have a picture of a bridge going over this kind of crazy water is because what you're doing when you're developing your network, of course, is you are trying to establish a series of relationships and connections between people. That's what a network is how you are connected to other people. You know that obviously it's a lot easier to define this now than it was 20 years ago, because we all have all sorts of social networks we belong to and media networks we belong to. So it's not a term that we're not familiar with anymore. But your job as you're going through, as you're networking, is to try and show people where you fit in. In a college environment, it's really easy to see where you fit in. You're a student, there are professors. You're either a master's student or you're a PhD student or you're a postdoc. There are professors, there are administrators. It's easy to see where you fit in. But when you go out into this broader professional field, you're still trying to keep up that job of showing people where you fit in. So what I want to ask you is kind of a word problem here, because a lot of you are technical majors. So what I want to know is, what's more important in terms of networking? Is what you know more important? Is who you know more important? Or would you say that they're equal? Skills and relationships are equally important. So when you go out there and you say, yeah, I should probably network, that's just as important as making sure you know the content of your discipline, because you have to be able to make connections with other people so that they know what you're good at and they know where to kind of place you in their professional world. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is kind of how to make these worlds interact, how to make your opportunities and your career intersect with one another. A lot of times you have to create those opportunities, and you have to make sure that when you're kind of building and maintaining these professional situations, you want to make sure that you're connecting up and you're connecting down. You don't want to just meet people who can help you. If you can help somebody else out, you never know when they're going to kind of bypass you in the field, or whether they're going to have a colleague who can help you someday. So you don't want to just try and get into something and figure out what is in it for you. People are going to figure you out really quickly, and you're not going to have a good reputation. They're going to start avoiding you at conferences. Oh, there's so-and-so, he's going to ask me for a job. Right? You don't want to be that guy or that girl, right? You want to make sure that you are connecting up and down with different kinds of people. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples about this. I have my brother-in-law, as a matter of fact, used to be an independent consultant for a healthcare corporation, and he said to me, my job, he said, is to actually talk about to make sales and develop my past relationships. And he said, that's just as important to me as anything else. He said, I won a pretty large project when I went out on my own from a former employer, and it wasn't because I kept trying to sell myself or my services to them, but I kept in touch with them. So when they had a big job open up, they contacted me instead of the company I used to work for, because they liked me. And the reason that they liked him was that he kept in contact with them. It doesn't mean he emailed them every day, but he kept in touch with the people that he had worked with before. He wasn't selling anything. He didn't want anything from them at that point, but he just kind of kept that network alive. He kept that line of communication open. So when they had something come up that was in his field, he was the first person they called, because they were in contact with him. It wasn't like, who was that guy that worked for us? We really liked him. He did some good stuff way back when. I wonder where he is now. They didn't have to do that. They went back in their email a month and saw Matt's information and kind of called him. And he said, but I don't he said, I also send business to my peers. If I have something that he had a job come up that somebody called him and he said to them, you know what, this really isn't my line of expertise, but my friend Joe Schmo does this line of healthcare consulting. He might be a better fit for you. This guy got the job, right? Joe Schmo got the job. So Matt was making a connection for this guy, but then when somebody called Joe Schmo up and said, excuse me, I am looking for someone, it was a headhunter who was calling him for a job, and he said, you know, I'm not actually really interested in moving right now, but you might want to call my friend Matt. Matt is thinking about making a career change, and he might be who you call. And my brother-in-law's current job came from that headhunter connection. So he did a favor for somebody else, someone else turned around and did the favor for him. But the reason that he had all these contacts to begin with was because he keeps his network going. He sends emails once in a while. He writes in and says, I just saw this article and I was thinking about you, you know, is this a problem you're running into? He keeps those lines of communication open, and that can be really important. Some of your professors, when I was talking to them about what it is that they're looking for, they said, you know what, sometimes I have a student come in and I haven't seen that student in 3 years, and they walk into my office and they say, I'm graduating, I need a job. Okay? And that sounds kind of strange to you, and they'll say, if I haven't seen that student in 3 years, one person said it to me this way, which I thought was interesting. He said, I don't feel obligated to help them, right? But when it's somebody who has been coming in very often and you have a connection with them, you have a relationship with them, they're much more bound to say, you know what? This person might be good for this job that has just come across my desk, right? Your professors aren't not usually looking for a new job, and if they're looking for a new job, they're not looking for a new job doing what you do, right? So sometimes they'll say, oh, you know, so-and-so was just in my office a few weeks ago, and he actually, this is his latest research. This might be a good fit for him, right? So I'm not saying you always want to be in contact with people because you want a job, but if you can start making connections with other people, and you can start seeing where other people fit into your broader network, whether it's a professional, usually a professional network, you can start kind of putting the right people together to make things happen. Even if you're not the person benefiting from that relationship, if you can say to someone, you know what, I just saw this job posted and this is really interesting for you. Or there's this new article coming out and this is something on your line of study. Or the person down the hallway who's doing research on something similar to what you're doing but not what you're doing. If you come up across a conference presentation and you're looking for a workshop to apply to or something to apply to have your own stuff and you don't find anything, but there's something ideal for the colleague who's sitting in the cubicle next to you or the office down the lab down the hall, a lot of times just sending something and saying, I don't know if you saw this, but this might be interesting for you to apply to. You know, something like that where you're keeping your connections open and you're making those connections for other people, it does two things for you. One, you are forwarding their career, but in a second way, you're back in their line of vision. You're back in their sphere if you can continue to try and make those connections. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Small talk is when you're talking to someone about something that is not very important. It's just when you're chatting. Hey, did you see the game last night? Oh, I really like your shoes. Oh my goodness, do you think we're going to get any snow? When you're talking about something and you're just making conversation and you're not necessarily looking for any kind of information. Does that make sense when you're just trying to kind of meet someone and you kind of have those initial conversations? Or you say it to the person behind you in line. I've never tried that kind of salsa before. Is it good? Right? It's just something where you're just trying to open a line of communication, where you're just trying to talk. Sometimes we don't think that this is very important, and I can't tell you the number of websites that kept trying to convince me when I was looking for information on small talk about how important it was, right? I saw a study from the Harvard Business Review, and it was talking about small talk being helpful not only with colleagues, but also with potential employers, also with your boss, also people in your extended network. So, you know, that's a kind of time where you send out the email, right, that says, I just saw there was a big snowstorm in Buffalo or wherever your person is, right? Are you guys okay? Do you have power? You know, whatever it happens to be, where you're just sending a quick email out and you're not, but again, you're back in their inbox, right? You're back in their line of field. But small talk helps to create a sense of rapport. It helps to bond with other people. It helps to establish positive relationships, and it also starts to win the trust and respect of people. So in terms of positive relationships, sometimes it's not something just as simple as, I really liked your talk yesterday, or if you're talking to a colleague and you say something like, I saw that you had a paper out on such and such, way to go, or good job, or just something like that where you're just establishing positive relationships with people. If you're out there and you're out there in a positive and supportive way. So sometimes it might feel, I know in certain cultures it seems rude to go up to a boss and say something very casual like, nice tie, but it's not always if you are looking for a job in the States, it's not always seen as something disrespectful. You don't go up to a complete stranger and say, nice tie. But if you're talking to someone and you say, oh, I saw that you were just, when I used to work in a development office in an engineering firm, the dean of engineering, I don't know what he does. He did something with crystallography. My PhD is in English. I don't know what crystallography is. So I can't talk to him about his profession. But I can talk to him about something like his travels, right? So if he comes up and I'll say, I saw you just went to China. And he'll say, yeah, I just went to China. I had a, such and such there. Wow, I've never been there. Do you travel there often, right? It's small talk, right? We're not looking for information from each other, but it's a way of us just establishing some sense of communication. All I'm doing is asking him a question about China. But then he remembers me in a positive way, because we have had this very pleasant conversation about his travels. Does that make sense? It's just small talk, right? It's not something I'm going to do all the time. If the two of us are in a meeting somewhere, I'm not going to all of a sudden burst in with something about China. But if we're in the same hallway, or if we're both getting a cup of coffee, then I can say, how are you? I saw that you just took a trip. How was your trip? That kind of thing. So it's just a casual thing. Or if you're into sports and your boss is into sports, don't fake it. Don't fake it, okay? I'm a Steelers fan, but I like them because I came from Pittsburgh. I don't like them because I know all sorts of things about football, right? So when I say to somebody something about a Steelers game, I have to be really careful who I talk to, because a football nut is going to try and engage me in some kind of deep conversation about strategy. I don't know that. I don't know anything about that. I don't care anything about that. I just want them to win. Okay. So when you go into a room, it would be nice if the person you really wanted to meet was lit up like this, right? When you go into a room, like if you're going to a professional conference and they have some kind of cocktail hour and you go and you walk in by yourself and you're wearing your little name tag and you're just walking around, it would be awfully nice if the person who was looking for someone to talk to was lit up like this so that you could find them and strategize with them. But what we're going to talk about next is how you go about doing that and how you make yourself open for conversation too. So one of the things you want to do is you want to kind of scope out the scene, and you want to look for people who are going to respond positively, right? So one of the things you're going to want to do is, if you see somebody who's standing all by themselves, that's a good person to go meet, because they're looking for someone to talk to just like you are, right? And a lot of times you're not going to go into this with a big group of friends. Sometimes when you're at a conference, you might have a colleague there, you might not, but you want to make sure you you find someone who looks like there's somebody who's talking to. A lot of times if you see a group of people, if they're grouped in 2 or 3 and they're kind of huddled like this, that's not the group you could try and break yourself into, right? They're obviously having a conversation about something and you're going to look strange trying to break in. But sometimes they're more talking like this to each other. That's a group of people you can introduce yourself to. Sometimes you can do it by looking at somebody's name tag and saying, oh, you're from the University of Oklahoma. My colleague went to the University of Oklahoma. He's a student in the blah blah department. Is that your department? Because if it's a professional association, chances are if it's not that person's department, it's the person down the hall's department, right? So they know some of the same people. And it's a way for you to get yourself into the conversation. And most people are open to looking at your name tag back and saying, oh, Rajiv, you are from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. How is my friend so-and-so who's in your department? And then you kind of have started establishing a communication. Doesn't mean you're going to be best friends with that person, but you have connections and then they'll introduce you to the other 2 people in your group. Have you met so-and-so? And then you kind of continue on with that conversation. It's not easy to do this. It takes all of us out of our comfort zone. It's very uncomfortable sometimes to try and figure out what you're going to do. So we want to talk about making the first move. If you want to go up to someone, sometimes what helps, not always, but what helps me sometimes is if you pretend you are the host if you're the host of a party, if you've ever had a party or a dinner or a luncheon with somebody, and you are the host, it is important for you to make the first move and make connections with other people. And it's important to make them feel comfortable. Sometimes if you can walk into a room, even if you're the new guy, even if you're the grad student, and you have your little Diet Coke or something non-alcoholic in your hand, okay, and you go up to somebody, if you can pretend that you are the host and you can go up to the person who's standing by themselves and say, hey, I see that you're kind of standing here by yourself. Is this your first conference? It's my first conference. What do you think? You know, if you can pretend that you're the host when you walk into the room and you look for the people who look uncomfortable, because as a host, right, when you have somebody at your house, your job is to make them try and feel comfortable in your home, right? If you can do that when you walk into a big room where there's a cocktail party going on, sometimes that can be very helpful. So if you can kind of not act nervous and not feel like somebody owes you something, nobody's going to come up to you necessarily, but if you can go up to that person and say, hi, my name is Maria, and I am from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Where are you from? And you look at their name tag, right? Something as simple as that sometimes is enough to start a conversation. Now, that person may or may not be receptive to your communication. If they say, oh, I'm from the University of Oklahoma, excuse me, I need to go get a drink. You don't follow them, right? You move on and you find someone else. But sometimes pretending you're the host can help you stop acting so nervous about how to act in these situations. If you can, ask open-ended questions. Oops, sorry. That's the problem with not having the clicker. Okay, if you can ask open-ended questions, meaning, where are you from? What do you think of the conference so far? Have you gone to any good presentations today, if it's a professional situation, right? If you're talking to someone locally, you can say something like, oh, how's the traffic around here? Anything where you're kind of getting, if you can ask open-ended questions, just kind of like, are you a professor? Yes. That's not an open-ended question, right? Yes, no questions are not open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are questions where you are actually, somebody's going to give you some kind of information. What is your field? What does that field, what do you do in your job? Whatever it happens to be, right? So I had to ask that question a lot when I started meeting my engineers. Okay, just as important as looking for someone who is looking for someone to talk to, you have to make yourself available to talk to. What's our automatic line of defense when we're not sure what to say? Everybody gets on their phone, they start texting, because it doesn't make you as nervous, right? Because you're connected with people you know. But guess what? If you're talking on your phone or if you're looking at your iPad, I'm not gonna walk up and talk to you because I feel like you're busy and I don't wanna interrupt you, right? So you need to make sure that you're not texting during the cocktail hour, that you're not crossing your arms and kind of walking around like this, right? Because then you look angry. I don't want to talk to you then either, right? You want to maintain eye contact when people are talking to you. You want to smile, not the whole time, because that's a little scary too. People think you're possessed by something, right? But you want to make sure that your face is a pleasant one. You don't want to kind of scowl at them. If this is not something you're very good at, this is going to sound really strange and a little narcissistic. Practice in a mirror, because you will know whether or not you have good eye contact or not by practicing in a mirror. Hi, I'm so-and-so, right? If you're not looking at yourself in the mirror as you're practicing, and it's going to sound strange, you want to close your door so your roommate doesn't walk in and see you practicing and smiling and talking to yourself in the mirror. But sometimes you can gauge whether or not you have good eye contact by practicing in the mirror. And again, if this is not your culture, it's not rude in the States to look at someone, okay? It is in other cultures where you don't want to make sure that it's kind of rude to kind of keep staring at someone. And you don't want to lock in with them like this, right? But you want to kind of keep looking at them and staying pleasant. Just as important as looking open, when you're listening, when you ask a question, listen to the answer. Be engaged, be present in the conversation. And I know this sounds very obvious, but I have someone I'm related to who does this a lot. He'll say, and he's genuinely happy to see you, right? He'll say, hey, what's going on? It's so great to see you. How are your kids? And you start telling them how your kids are, and he's doing this. He's looking all around the room. He's not really listening to the answer. I always wonder how he reports the conversation back. What does he think my kids are doing? Because he's not listening to me right now, right? It's just something he's not very good at doing, right? He's not very good at listening to the answer. So when you ask a question, you better be ready to listen to the answer too. So don't ask the question, if you don't really care about the traffic pattern in Enid, Oklahoma, don't ask. Right? Ask something else. Ask about, I don't know, their shoes. Ask about something that, and I'm always interested in hearing about people's shoes. So, but ask something where you're interested in the answer. If you're going to ask a question, like I said, it sounds really obvious. Listen to the answer, because that's how a conversation starts, right? So you're not continually firing separate questions about something, but you say something, they say something back, you take something from what they said, you ask another question, right? That's how the conversation starts. That's how you move beyond, my name is Maria, I am from Charlotte, and into, I write for a living. Oh, what kinds of things do you write, right? That's how you get into those kind of more specific things, is by listening to the answers that people are giving you in a conversation. A good handshake. I cannot tell you how often you can have a bad handshake and have that kind of ruin a meeting or make you look bad. You need to put out your hand, and we're going to practice with each other. And you're going to shake that person's hand firmly. Look them in the eye. My name is so-and-so. This is you don't want a half-handed grip. You don't want this. Okay? No. You don't want to make it a bone crusher, okay? I got accused of this a couple of minutes ago when I practiced with someone. Whoa, that's a little bit hard, right? You don't want to crush the bones in somebody's hand. So there's a fine line between cold fish, this kind of handshake, and the handshake where you're kind of showing them that you lift, that you can bench 275 pounds. You don't want either one of those things, okay? You want to maintain eye contact. You want to smile as you meet the new person. If you have a long, foreign-sounding name like me, you want to say your name slowly. I am Maria Papanikolaou. Nice to meet you, right? And they're going to go, whoa, the Matthew Browns of the world are going to go, oh, that's a long name. And then you have a conversation about that, right? That you get a million times when you call anybody on the phone and you have to spell your first name and you spell your last name. But it's okay. It's because it's a way to start the conversation going, right? So we're going to practice that. All right. So I always find it helpful, and I'm hoping you do, because this is where we're going next, to talk about lines to use, how to start a conversation if you don't want to just say, hi, what's your name, where are you from? Right? That's a good start, but after that you need to go somewhere. So you can talk about something, this is kind of specifically for conferences, I think. I flew in from Charlotte. Was it hard for you to get here? Right? Everybody had to travel from somewhere to get to this conference. Nobody lives at the hotel. So I did this once at a conference. I accompanied my husband to a conference. I was in a room full of psychologists, and I said to somebody, oh, we flew in from such and such. Did you have a hard time getting here? And he said, I live here. Okay? So that can be a problem, or you can turn it to your advantage, right? You can say, oh, well, is the traffic bad here? Is it a hard place to get to? Is it hard to get around in this town? Or you can say, or how long have you lived here, right? You can still listen to the answer and do something with the information. But a lot of times somebody's going to have some kind of either complaint or praise for the airline or something else. And it's a way, again, just to start the conversation. You're not going to talk about it for hours, but you can talk about conference topics. What did you think of the last keynote speaker? What talks will you be attending? Things like that, where you're just talking about it's not a good idea to insult the keynote speaker, okay? That could be that person's colleague or friend or co-writer. So you don't want to do that unless there was some kind of logistical problem. Wow, the microphone really wasn't working very well. Could you hear from where you were sitting, right? If it's something like that where we're not commenting on anything, that kind of thing. Or I just went to, if you see their specialty is something that you know something about, because sometimes you meet the rock stars, right? The academic rock stars in your area, and you know their name from something that you've read by them, or maybe the main textbook in your class is by that person. You can say, I just went to a talk on such and such, and that sounds like something that you wrote about, right? Where you're getting them to talk about themselves, if you can make a connection. To locals, you can say something really simple, and this is what I asked this guy after he said, I live here. I said, oh, what's the best place to eat around here? Where do you like to go eat, right? So, because I like to ask questions about food partly, but also it gets him talking, and I'm asking his opinion about something he knows about, right? I don't have to go to the conference hotel restaurant.
What did you say, what did you think of the keynote speaker. Like that seems a little unnatural. Keynote, like would you say that?
If that's what they call the person, or you can say, if it's a person you know, what did you think of Judith Butler's talk? Did you go? You know, you can mention the person by name if keynote speaker sounds awkward to you. So if that's not something you would use in your field, then you can say, did you go to Judith Butler's big talk? I went. What did you think? Right. So yeah, you're right. These are kind of broad outlines. You need to put it in a way that makes it sound like it's coming from you. And that's why I said, I'm never going to go to a conference in Pennsylvania and engage somebody in Steelers talk. I just want them to win, right? So I'll say to somebody, did you watch the game last night? Were you happy with the outcome? But I'm not going to talk about strategy in the game because I don't know anything about it, right? I know the basic rules of football, and that is all. So I can't get in there and talk about recruiting efforts and trades and injuries, and I don't know, I don't care, right? But so no, you make it sound comfortable to you, because if you find it awkward to say, or if you find it like that you would never say keynote speaker, don't say it, because you're going to be uncomfortable saying it. You want to say it in a way that works for you. Did you go to so-and-so's big talk, or did you go to the main speaking event last night, or whatever it is that makes it, you need to own it as your own. So whatever you would say. So if you wouldn't say, where's the best place to eat around here? Don't ask that question. If food questions are not your questions, you can ask about something else. The weather, the traffic, the job opportunities, whatever is interesting to you. Whatever you're going to listen to the answer to, right? I'm always going to listen to the food answers. Okay, so any other questions before we kind of move on? Like I said, I hope this is helpful. I like having little tips about how I find it very uncomfortable to go into a room full of strangers and figure out who I'm supposed to talk to and then what I'm supposed to say when I get up there. So I'm hoping this is a little helpful to you, because we're so good at doing it online. We're not always good at kind of being alone with our drink and looking for the people to talk to. After the initial introduction, you can start by saying something about yourself, not a monologue, not a long kind of big speech about yourself, but just something really simple. I'm Maria, I work in the graduate school at UNCC, and I help students with their oral communications skills. Is that something you find your students are good at? Right? I've told you a little bit about why I want to know, but I'm also turning it around and asking you an open-ended question. Right? And that person will say, yeah, you know, because we have a workshop on such and such that we give every year. Or no, my students really aren't good at that, and then that's something we talk about. Right? So I've kind of said a little about myself and maybe why I want to know. You can also network and get good information. Sometimes you might see someone's name tag at a conference, and they might be at the hoity-toity place in Colorado where you want your postdoc. They might be at a place where you want to do research sometime. They might be at the place where you want to work on your PhD. So you see their name tag and you can say something like, oh, I see you're at the University of, Boulder. I've always been interested in their work, and I saw a position that was open, and I'm thinking about applying. Do you have any advice for me? What do you like working there? And a lot of times, people like being asked for their advice, right, or for their opinion on things. They appreciate that. I like being asked for my advice. I'm kind of the queen of unsolicited advice, but I like being asked for advice sometimes, and a lot of times they'll say, yeah, that I did see that position open up, and we're looking for people who do this, this, and this. Or, you know what, this is not a great time for you to be looking at a job at such and such a place because we're having a lot of turnover right now. Whatever it happens to be, sometimes you can get some good information. But you can use that name tag information to work to your advantage. It's a way to at least open up the conversation. Oh, I've never been to Texas A&M before. What's it like there, right? Something to kind of get you started and to get you in the door. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of small talk leading to success. This is my former boss when I worked at Texas A&M, and his name is Jim Harner. And this is, for people who are getting into the PhD program, this is the Bible in terms of how to go about and do your research. It talks about how to kind of navigate through any library system, any bibliography system, anything. Because in English, a lot of times you're not looking forward to what the person's doing next. You're looking to see what was happening in 18th century France, and you need to go back and do your research through archives and through other places. Anyway, when he got this is the cover of the 5th edition. He's finishing up the 6th edition right now. When he was still in graduate school, I think, or maybe he had just started his first job. He went out to dinner with one of his more senior colleagues, and that senior colleague's friend who worked at a publishing house, one of the university presses. And he was sitting there eating his dinner, and the person finally turned to him and said, "What are you working on?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'm seeing that my graduate students really don't know how to pull their information together from different kinds of sources to be able to find the information they need. There's not really a good way for them to navigate, so I'm trying to kind of pull some information together for them." She said, "That's a great idea." And that was where the book contract came from, right? It was small talk, but he was ready with an answer. So sometimes small talk, he wasn't going out to that dinner to network. He was going out to that dinner because when you're young and you're underemployed and somebody offers you a nice dinner out, you go, right? And why not go out to dinner with this person who, you know, may or may not be. But that's where the first book contract came from, is that he was specific in what he was looking for. He talked about the problems his students were having and what he was doing to solve it. And the book contract came from there. And to give you an example of how famous this book is, when he was working on this edition, he always takes his book with him, you know, because that's what he uses. The resource makes sense to him, right? He wrote it. And so when he's updating it and he wants to make notes about how to make it better, he takes it with him. And so he went to the Library of Congress in DC, and a woman looked in his bag and said, "Oh, you brought your Harner? I like the Harner for this, this, and this reason." And he just looked at her and said, "Thank you." She said, "Are you Harner?" And he said, "Yeah." And so he got to go back into all these archives, which doesn't mean anything to you, but for us, is really, really cool that you get to go back into the Library of Congress and kind of see where they store things and how it works, right? Like I said, I know you're not English people. The Library of Congress doesn't matter for you. But for us, that is a tour of, I don't know, NASA or something. I mean, it's really, really big. So, and I took her picture down because we decided we were going to videotape this. But my sister was telling me a story about a colleague who, they were mentioning this girl, and we're just going to name her Jane Doe. And someone said, "Oh, Jane Doe, you know, she's really becoming a big leader in the field, and she's somebody you ought to meet." And somebody they were talking to said, "Jane Doe?" And she has a very unusual name, so it's like a Maria Papanicolau. "Jane Doe? Jane Doe that's about such a, 35 years old?" And they said, "Yeah, you know Jane Doe? She used to be my secretary," right? You need to be nice to everybody. People who are above you, people who are below you. You never know where that next contact, but I'll bet you anything that Jane Doe's former employer probably wrote her an email right after that meeting and said, "Jane Doe, you're never going to believe I heard your meeting in your name in a meeting. I didn't know you were working for such and such now. Congratulations." You're going to reopen that line of communication if you were nice to Jane Doe when she worked for you. Right? So again, you never know where this small talk, where these kind of little conversations that you have with people every day are going to come up again. And it's not a unique story, that kind of Jane Doe story. My sister told me another story. My sister is kind of my guru when it comes to professional communication, because she's I never remember what it is she does for a living, but I just tell people she's a business tycoon, because she just has one of those kind of important jobs. But she said that there's an employer that she knows that will leave a job candidate sitting in the lobby for like an extra 15 minutes, and they're leaving them there to see how they interact with the secretary. That's it, right? Because they want people in their company who are going to work with everyone, and that everyone's input is important. So if the secretary is sitting there and you're starting to do this while you're waiting, you can do that, okay? And it might not be the company that we're talking about, or you can try and say to the secretary, "Oh, Jane, do you like working here? My name is Maria. I'm interviewing here today. Have you worked here for a long time?" And they'll usually engage you. And then, "Do you like working here?" "Yeah." And if they kind of give you these short answers because they're busy, then you kind of go back to reading your magazine or whatever you were doing before. But be nice to everyone, right? Be nice to people who you think might be able to help you out, and people you might be able to help out, because you never know when those next connections are going to come from. You never know how that might be helpful to you. Again, you're trying to build your network. You're not just trying to build up. Because not everybody is going to be able, because if you keep just trying to build up and climb the ladder, people are going to remember that about you. You want to build out. You want to cast your net out as far as you can, because you never know who the person is who's going to make that connection, who's going to bring you in as an expert on this, or a nice guy who can help us with that, or whatever it happens to be. So you want to cast your net out as far as you can and not worry about, what can this person do for me? Do I want to meet them? You might go to a conference and see the list of participants and go, ooh, the guy I really want to work with at the hoity-toity lab in Colorado is going to be there. I hope I can meet him, right? You can have a plan to try and meet a certain person, but you don't go around and look at people's name tags and go, you're not him, you're not him, you're not him. You know, you want to be able to go ahead and meet all sorts of people and see what they might have to offer you. They might have something even better than the lab in Colorado, right? You never know. Like I said, I wish people had told me this when I went into career fairs for the first time. So I'm telling you what I would have liked to have known about career fairs. And I was doing, I'm going to give you his name in the handout that I'm handing out at the end, but his name is Garth Fowler, and he does a lot of recommendations to science and technical majors about how to navigate the career field and how to kind of work through things. And he was saying, so I'm going to read you the anecdote because he says it better than I could. But he said, I attended my first career fair unintentionally. I was at a conference, and as I walked past one of the meeting rooms on my return from lunch, I saw tons of people standing in long lines in front of small tables. I was willing, maybe eager, to skip the next series of talks, so I decided to investigate. I walked up to one of the few tables with no line and asked the woman behind it what was happening. It's a career fair, she replied. Are you looking for a job? He was like, yeah, what a lucky break. Without even trying, I was about to start my job search. So I spent the afternoon answering questions about what kind of research I did and what type of jobs I might want. But my answers weren't well thought out, right? Because he didn't even know the career fair was going on. So he was just kind of chatting, right? I knew nothing about the companies attending, and I had no strategy. But I collected a wealth of useless items like refrigerator magnets, keychain flashlights, and business cards. And when the afternoon ended, I felt great. The recruiters knew me now, so it was only a matter of time until one of them called me up and offered me a great job. Or so I thought. Back at the lab was business as usual, no phone calls. I didn't follow up because I couldn't remember the names of any of the recruiters. I'd lost or thrown out those business cards, or worse yet, the companies they worked for. Not remembering the recruiters' names wasn't such a big deal. What really mattered, I realized, was that the recruiters didn't remember me. I had not given them a reason to, right? Because if you're giving vague, half-thought answers, they've heard that already, right? On the recruiters' radar screens, I had been a tiny temporary blip. Career fairs, I concluded, were a waste of time, and indeed they are if you approach them the way I did. But I knew people then, and I know more now, who have gotten leads and even jobs via career fairs. I began to wonder, why had my experience been so different? So, kind of tip number one as you go to a career fair is, first of all, you want to do your homework. Figure out who's going to be there and who it is you want to talk to. The business office or your department office, whoever is organizing the career fair, has a list of the companies that are attending. So you're going to figure out who it is that you want to talk to. And you don't have time to talk to everybody in the room if it's a big career fair, but you are going to have specific people. Look up those companies online so you can ask specific questions. You don't want to say, oh, American Widget, what is it that you guys do exactly? Right? You knew American Widget was coming. If you want to know what American Widget does, go on the American Widget webpage and find out what they're doing. So you can say, I saw you were working on plastics. That's something I'm doing some research on. What kind of stuff do you do with polymer technology? Whatever it is, right? I'm making this up because I don't know anything about plastics. But you can find out. Find if there are jobs listed and there are positions you think you want to fill. Find out what they are. Find out specific things about them. Bring some copies of your CV or resume on nice paper. Okay? All of you have a curriculum vitae, I hope. Or if you don't, get one. Most of you probably don't have one-page resumes, I'm guessing. I don't know what it's like in engineering. CVs, right? Isn't it a curriculum vitae that you use in engineering? Alan's, the guy I used to work with that went to China, had one that was 55 pages long because all of his publications were on it. But you have something, right, that has your name, your contact information, something. Bring business cards. Don't start handing them out like this, right? But if you have business cards, bring them along. Pack a notebook and a pen to take notes as you go. You're going to be meeting a lot of people. You don't take notes as you're talking to them, right? But you are going to want to take notes as you go. Arrive early if you can. A lot of times, if it's in a big kind of conference hall, what they'll have is they will have some kind of map on the outside of the room that shows you where specific companies have tables. So you can kind of plan, if you know there are 5 companies you want to see, you might as well kind of see them in the order so you're not, zooming around the room. You might want to just check out the room setup and see where those companies are. You want to get a directory of attendees if you can. And again, you want to plan your approach. And you want to check your appearance. Go into the bathroom, make sure you don't have a poppy seed in your teeth, right? You want to make sure that you look the way you want to look. You haven't missed a button or anything. Silence the phone. You don't look important if your phone rings 100 times while you're talking to someone. They get distracted. They stop listening to you and they're concentrating on your phone ringing, right? So silence your phone before you go. This is kind of, if you've never been to a career fair, this is kind of the way it's set up. You see this long line of tables down the room? The important person is going to be standing behind the table. You're the one walking around on the other side. Not that you're not important, you're all lovely, but you're the one looking for the job, right? So a lot of times they're going to be standing there, and then you're going to go up to them and say, hi, my name is such and such, I'm in the whatever department, and then they're going to engage you in a conversation. And you're going to respond to their questions, but then that's why it's important to have done your homework, because then you can ask them a specific question back. That's how you get remembered, right? This kind of half thought of, what is it you do? They're going to answer 1,000,000 times. You don't want to ask that question. You want to be able to ask specific questions. So again, you're going to approach the reps. You're going to shake the employer's hand, firm handshake, right? You're going to smile. You're going to clearly state your name. All of that. One of the things that people want to know when they get there is, how do I know whether I can have a deeper conversation with this person? So you need to be aware of the surroundings. The person that we saw in the last picture didn't have anyone standing behind her in line. So you can't have a deep conversation with the rep if there are long lines of people behind you. It's rude. It's rude to the rep, because the rep has a lot of people that she's supposed to meet or he's supposed to meet, and it's rude to the people behind you. And I know you don't care about them because you want the job, but you're going to look like you're not socially aware of your surroundings if you do that, okay? So if there are no long lines, yes, you can ask a couple of questions about what they do. You can talk about what you're interested in, what you're working on, why you're interested in that company. I do work on plastics. I see that you are manufacturing a new line of plastics for the government. That would be a project that I would love to work on. I think your company is doing great work. Okay? Leave a copy of your resume if they're collecting them. Okay? You don't just randomly leave a copy of your resume if nobody's looking for a job. Not everybody's collecting resumes. Sometimes the reps are there to meet people, get names, and figure out who they want to invite to the next event that they're having. Yes?
About the resume,
yeah.
Do you have to put it in a folder, and one of those clear folders, you can just hand it in like that? Like if it's more than one page and it's stapled, that's okay? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that most academic CVs are more than one page. I don't know anyone who has a one-page CV. If you're going for industry jobs where one-page resumes are the norm, then you're just going to have it on nicer paper. Not, 90-pound cardstock or anything, but on nicer paper. It's not the stuff that you buy in the big packs that you have in your computer all the time. But no, I think a stapled resume is fine if they're collecting resumes. Thank the recruiter, smile, thank them for the time, ask for their business card, okay? Pick up any information they have on the organization, if they have a brochure, a bookmark they're giving out, whatever. I know some of this stuff you don't care about, but if you're going to be going in for further interviews later, or you want to write and ask a specific question, it's nice to be able to say, I was looking at the brochure that you had at the career fair, and they said X. What do you think about whatever it is, right? After you've met with any kind of a potential employer, what you want to do is you want to step away from the area, and you want to take a couple of notes. Anything that's going to help you remember what it was that the two of you talked about. Right? Because it's not going to have been a long conversation, and if you're going to a career fair and you're going to be talking to 12 companies while you're there, they're all going to start to blend together in your head after a while. So remember something about the recruiter, even if you just want to remember what they looked like, so that you can kind of picture that face in your head when you're writing them an email later. Take a couple of notes. You don't do it right in front of them, right? You got to find a place in a corner, and they're worried about meeting the next person. They're not worried about you anymore. But you don't want to be taking notes right after, as you take one step away from them, right? You want to find an area where you can do this. File away their business card. If you had a personal connection, the pita pit, whatever, make a note of it on the back of your card. And then you look over your research and you get ready for the next place you're going to visit, okay? After your meeting, you have to follow up, okay? Again, we're going to kind of go through somewhere. You want to retrace your steps, jot down the notes, figure out how to follow up with each person. What's the best thing to do in this situation? Do I send them a resume? Do I call a hiring manager if that person was just there doing the initial things? Do I send a short thank you note? It was great meeting you at the UNCC Career Fair on March 1st. I really enjoyed hearing more about XYZ company. I hope that I would love to talk to you further about whatever it is, right? So anything where you can kind of keep yourself in their line of vision. I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to people who've just graduated from their undergraduate degree, and they sit there all day long on Career Builder and those sites, and they keep sending out resumes, and they'll send 40, 50, 60 resumes a day, and they don't know why nothing is happening. And the reason is because these are getting dumped into a database. If you want to get noticed, you've got to call those people yourself and say, hi, I'm just calling up to follow up on my resume that I sent for the blah blah position. Are you the person I talked to about it? And normally they'll put you in touch with the right person. And I had that happen to me once where I did that. And I think first of all, the person was surprised that I called on the telephone because nobody calls on the telephone anymore. We do everything online. And second of all, she kind of pulled my resume up and she goes, you know what? And I learned something important that day. I never would have called you back from this resume because the most recent job that you had on this resume looks like it's from 2012. What are you doing now? Oh, I'm a consultant now. You don't have that on your resume, right? I had made a big mistake. This person thought I hadn't worked for 2 years, right? And so I learned something important, but I also got an interview because we had spent some time talking on the telephone, right? She's like, yeah, I would love to meet you. Can you come down tomorrow? Sure, I can come down tomorrow. Thanks, right? By then I had updated my resume because I'm not an idiot, right? And we had talked, we started talking about what I could do for them. So there are times where this is going to work to your advantage. I like this phrase so much in terms of networking that farmers will always beat out hunters. If you're hunting for the person that can give you the best lead, if you're hunting for the person who can be to your advantage the most, and you're not farming, you're not cultivating relationships, you're not continuing to build them, farmers are always going to win out, okay? You want to kind of remember that good networking is about farming. Good networking is about a continual conversation. Good networking is about forging communication. See an interesting article a professor is going to like? Send it. Be helpful, be courteous, keep in touch so then when you're like my brother-in-law Matt and an opportunity comes up, you're at the forefront of people's minds. Like I said, you don't send them a weekly joke, right? You have any retired people on your email distribution list? You get a lot of, do you? Do you know what I'm talking about, right? You get a joke every day. And they send, always, my father-in-law is infamous for this, always a goodie. Always, an oldie but a goodie. I'm like, you sent this to me 5 times. I don't want to see it again, right? Whatever it happens to be. I don't need the pictures of the sunsets. So, and leave on a good note and say thank you, right? Even an email saying thank you for the interview. Thank you for your time. I enjoyed meeting you at the such and such. Thank people for the time that they're coming out there. So that's what I got for you.